Hello there. This is February the 24th, 2023. I have a question from Doreen in Texas. It's a really good question. This is about Moses not being allowed to enter the promised land. I like this one. I just do not understand why God did not allow Moses to enter the promised land. How did Moses not believe God to treat him as holy? My thinking, this is about Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 through 12. I'll read this in just a moment. My thinking is that Moses just got angry and fed up with the people, as had happened before this specific time. It just seems really harsh to Moses, given all he had done through all he had gone through with the Israelites. But I'm sure there's something I'm not understanding. All right, well, the first thing is that we can't say it just seems really harsh to Moses given all he had gone through. We have to be careful with that, because to say, given all that Moses had gone through, all that Moses went through, all that he had to tolerate, why would God be so harsh with him? We have to understand that even though Moses did go through a lot for God, he did a lot for God. Even though he did all of that, even though he went through all of that, even though he endured, even though he suffered, we have to be careful and understand that God does not owe Moses. All right? And I know that this can be really tough, because a lot of people just, there are people who really want others to owe them. If I endure, if I suffer, if I go through all kinds of whatever it is, then I can say that somebody kind of owes me, because I endured a whole lot for them, and so for them to treat me harshly because I do something wrong just doesn't seem right, because, they kind of owe me. And so, yeah, I did something a little bit rough, but we can kind of, we can balance that out a little bit with, but I did some good stuff kind of thing. And that's just not the way that God relates to people. It's how we want God to relate to us, and it's how we want other people to relate to us. But he just doesn't do that. He just does not accept a relationship based on debt, based on you owe me. That to him is not a relationship, and this should be something that we consider between each other as well, to try to avoid having a relationship with someone else based on debt, based on you owe me or I owe you. That kind of relationship is just really kind of awkward. So we want to be somewhat careful about that. There have been times, I myself, when somebody's really, really helped me out in a profound way. There's been a few occasions when people have really helped me out in a substantial way, and I do, feel a sense of debt towards them. Now, for those of you who are watching this video and you have helped me out in a profound way, I don't want you to feel like like I owe you, like I owe you, because I did this for somebody, but I didn't do it for you. Please try not to feel bad about it. All right, it's just because, this was just one of those unique circumstances where what I did was I wrote out a gift certificate, and the gift certificate said one favor, and I even wrote down some examples of the kinds of favors that I would offer. And I would also include a disclaimer that I may have to deny that particular favor, but on occasion I would give people a gift certificate and said, I hereby give you a gift certificate for one favor from Aaron Budgeon. One favor. And so, I have had some circumstances where, an I owe you something or, can kind of exist, but I want you to know this is a very unusual situation. I can't just hand out 100 gift certificates on favors. I would not be able to fulfill them. If they were, especially if maybe 10% or 20% of them were called upon me for redemption at the same time. It's a physical limitation. All right. So the idea of having a relationship on the basis of debt or owing is something that's easy for us to fall into. And I wanted to spend some time talking about that in this context because it's a good opportunity to see it. That he went through a lot, he did a lot, and after all that he did and all that he went through, he couldn't get into the promised land. Well, again, the decision cannot be made on the basis of debt. All right, so let's read the passage. This is in Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 through 12. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals." So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe me, to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." All right, now there can be some conversation about the Lord said, "Speak to the rock." He didn't say, "Hit the rock." He said, "Just speak to the rock." And so Moses and Aaron grabbed the rod and they hit the rock with the rod instead of speaking to the rock. There could be a conversation about this. Did God give them the instruction to hit the rock like Moses did before? This is the second time. The first time, he took the rod and he struck the rock. All right? And I have a picture of this rock, or at least I have every reason to believe that it is this rock, that still remains at the geographical location that's the most likely and the most well documented that could be the rock that was struck. It's a big rock, huge, and you can see the water, the cutting of the water that would have flowed from one side of it, but not on the other side. And so I personally believe that this really happened. And I believe that I have evidence that shows this. I've got video footage and photographic evidence of this. But this is a different rock. We don't know about this rock. I don't know about this rock. But this is a different one. And water came out of it. God went ahead and he provided the water. So there's something to be said about this. Even though they didn't do it right. Moses didn't do it right. God still provided the water. That was very gracious of him. That was kind. But in the midst of that, he still now has to deal with Moses and Aaron. And so he told Moses, "Look, because you didn't believe me and because you didn't glorify me in this sense before the congregation, hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, because you didn't follow through with this, with the faith and with the trust and with the belief that I needed you to have before the children of Israel, because of that, I have decided that you are not going to enter the promised land." Okay? Now, we have no evidence at all that God gave him a warning concerning this. We got no law that God gave that said, if you strike the rock with the stick twice, you will not be allowed to enter the promised land. This is a decision that was made without warning. God just decided, hey, you know what? I'm just going to say that this is the way it's going to be. All right? So that can tell us a lot about our God and how he makes decisions about things. But what I would like to focus on is the fact that he says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, because you did not believe me." All right? Let's focus on that part at first. Moses, you really didn't believe me. When you approached that rock and you hit that rock, you said, shall I? What do you mean, shall you? You know, that's what he says. It says, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Must we? That was a lack of trust. He should have said it differently. He should have said something that would sound more like, you rebels, you people, God is going to bring forth water from this rock. Turn to the rock and speak to it and say, rock, bring forth water as God will bring forth water through you. Instead, he picks up the stick. Must we? Should we? Hit the rock. Maybe it'll work. But see, if it doesn't, Moses won't look bad. Okay? That's what it is. If it doesn't happen, Moses won't look bad. He didn't believe. He didn't believe God. All right? Now, how would God think about this? How would he feel about this? And you might think, well, what does that matter? Well, it does matter. What God thinks matters. And how he feels matters. And he showed it here to Moses. What I think actually matters. And how he feels matters. And you can just see, you can just imagine. It's easy to consider how God would feel. How would you feel if you were God and you were looking down there and all these rebellious people and Moses, and you told Moses, go do this and I will bring forth water from the rock. And that's how Moses does it? Must we? Shall we? What do you mean? I told you I will do this, and you did not believe me. Those people, who are being rebellious in that sense, they didn't believe God. They didn't trust God. So now Moses doesn't believe and trust God either? Yeah, okay. That's how you really feel about God? And you know what? This bothers him. This is important to him. He is trustworthy. He is believable. And when a person does things or says things that demonstrates that he is not to be trusted, he is not believable, that bothers him. Okay? It's important to him. And in this case, it's so important that he says, you know what, Moses, I'll tell you what. You don't believe me? You don't go to the promised land either. There you go. That's it. Nothing more to say about it. Okay? Now, there's something else that I would really like to mention here about this, and that is that Moses struck the rock twice. Not only did he hit it once, when we could have a discussion about he should have just been talking to it, not only did he hit it once, but he hit it a second time. Now, there is a foreshadowing that is here that was revealed later. Okay? And so for God to say, you know what, this is significant, this is meaningful, especially in the way that he's going to use it later, I think that this is a big deal. And that I do believe that God was thinking about this from a future context, because there was a lot more he was going to do. The Messiah still hasn't come yet. It's going to be a while. When the Messiah came, he was identified as the rock. All right? And Paul described this in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Most of them, right? Which ones? The ones who left Egypt. None of them made it, except for Joshua. and one other. But that was it. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul speaks of the rock, and that the rock is the Savior. Okay, the rock is the Messiah. The rock was a picture. It was a foreshadowing. It was a prophetic inference of what God would do at a later date in the context of the Messiah. All right, and so the Messiah is identified as the rock, and the Messiah was struck in accordance with prophecy. All right, and the purpose of that was to provide for the forgiveness of sins in the way that God decided to provide for the forgiveness of sins, so that he would remember our sins no more, so that the new covenant would go into effect according to the prophecy related to that. All right? And so we have the Messiah who was struck in order to make the provision for the forgiveness of sins that would invoke the new covenant that we now have in effect today. And he was only to be struck once. All right? You only strike Jesus or the Messiah once. One time for the forgiveness of sins. The sin issue was resolved once and for all. Okay? One time. And so by striking the rock twice, what this can represent is the idea of, well, when God resolved the sin of the world, that wasn't enough. He's going to have to do it again and again, maybe. Okay? And that is the biggest struggle that the Christian world has had ever since Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world. The biggest struggle is finding a way, or not finding a way. It is the issue of finding a way to keep sin alive and to keep a sacrificial system alive, to keep the forgiveness issue open and not bring it to an end, not bring it to a close. We've got to find another way to get forgiven. That's striking the rock twice. For example, if a person surrenders to the new covenant and they embrace the forgiveness that God has given to them, when the person asks God to forgive them for their sins again, all right, that's the same thing as striking the rock twice. It's the same thing. Asking God to forgive you of a sin he has already forgiven you of is striking the rock twice. And people do that in all kinds of creative ways. You've got the Catholics who are into their confessional system. You've got the Protestants who forgot what they were protesting and became Protestants and now have their 1 John 1:9s and their other stuff that they do, their altar calls and stuff to get forgiveness. We got to go get forgiveness. And the only way that can be done is by, in effect, striking the rock a second time. All right, and this is a spiritual thing. It is an abstract thing. This would be better saved for me to do a verse-by-verse presentation and study on 1 Corinthians chapter 10, which I will do at a later date, hopefully if I live long enough to be able to do it. But this is what I see when it comes to Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 through 12, and the significance of striking the rock twice. All right, you don't seek for forgiveness from God a second in a second context of some kind, a second time. He did it once and for all. I'm not saying that there's anything evil about speaking with God about our sins. We can say things like, God, look what I just did. This is awful. And he would probably say, if he was to say something, yeah, yep, you're right. That's awful. Yeah, and yes, you did that. We are fortunate that this is something that has been forgiven because of what he did on the cross. That's not a way of justifying it, saying that it's okay. it has nothing to do with that at all. It has to do with this is what allows us to have a relationship of some kind in the midst of the sinfulness that we have, so that God can continue to work within us, change and transform us over a period of time, such that there may come a point when the opportunity to sin presents itself and we say, no, I'm not going to do that. That is a miracle of God. It is a miracle of God when we do not sin. Okay, that's a miracle. So, this is how I would consider this, and also to say why it is so important to believe that the sin issue has come to an end, because it can easily fit in the same category as Moses did not believe that God was going to bring forth water from the rock. He didn't believe that, and so he didn't enter into the promised land. So also, when we do not believe that the sin issue has come to an end, we cannot enter into the promised land of the relationship that our God has presented for us. All right? We can't enter into that. At least not in the, this is not an absolute context in the sense of, you're going to go to hell kind of thing. I'm describing this in order for you to understand the significance of the forgiveness of sins, of the Messiah being the rock, all right? And that for us to experience the relationship that our God has called us to, it is important for us to believe the truth, especially when it comes to the topic of forgiveness. And for us to strike the rock another time, we're just not in the promised land. Okay, you're just not there. You're not going to be able to experience it. Okay, in that abstract concept. Okay, so that is the best that I can do, I think, for Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 through 12, and for us to understand the significance of this, what it implies, and that it really is important for us to believe God. It is important to Him that we believe Him and that we trust Him. All right, if you have any other questions for me, do send them to me by email to aaron@aaronbudgeon.net. Thanks.